So as I was introduced, I'm an urban agriculture consultant. That's a pretty unusual role and basically one I've developed for myself. I do have a blog called agritecture.com, and this is about bringing in architecture and agriculture together. And very grateful for the fact that 3 years ago, as a result of my blog, people started coming to me and asking about how they could integrate agriculture into buildings, and that's when our consultancy started. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey to get here, give some informative discussion on different types of urban agriculture and how they vary and their impact. And then I'm going to introduce some new ideas about smart agriculture for smart cities and some new things that we're working on to help move cities forward. So a little bit of background about me. I was lucky enough to grow up around the world. My father's an engineer, and I was born in Hong Kong, the original concrete jungle. And I think back to those days and the things I learned from that experience, the parks embedded into cliff sides, the pedestrian walkways piled on top of each other, our apartment on the 40th floor looking over the ocean. And I think all of this density and this kind of culture in one place really defined me at an early age. And then we moved to Japan, Tokyo, Japan, and that also, supplemented that. And it wasn't until I was a teenager, my parents were tired of the city, that they invested in a country house in the Czech Republic where my mother's from. And this was the first time that, as a 14-year-old, I started engaging in agriculture as we built a bit of a smallhold there, a small garden and some greenhouses. And I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, I just had no experience. And my parents, they at least had a history when they were younger in having gardens with their families. And I had just grown up completely removed from that, and I had to relearn it. But I'm grateful for those experiences, and I think that combination of growing up in cities and then as a teenager shifting a little bit more to the countryside has really informed a lot of what I do now. It'll be a bit more apparent why I told that story. Does anybody know what this number is, what it might represent? Any guesses? My age, I'm 58. And now I'm 58, and urban agriculture has kept me young. No, it's the elixirs on the 12th floor. You got to try them. This is the average age of the U.S. farmer. So I think that's a pretty concerning number that has been increasing for the past 30 years. And I think we hear a lot of people talk about food security, right? And we don't really know what that means necessarily. I'll get into a little bit about the details of that. But I think about knowledge security. Who's going to grow our food in the future if we don't have any people who know how to grow food? And I think that this is a real problem. And what excites me about some of the emerging forms of agriculture, and I think Tobias Peggs from Square Roots, one of our clients came here to talk about what they've done. These emerging forms of agriculture, these high-tech forms of agriculture can inspire young people to get involved. And that's kind of what brought me back into this, is this idea of how technology and architecture can combine with nature to grow food, do some productive end. And there's a revolution happening around the world, if you will, a renaissance of agriculture. It's cool now again, and young people are coming up with really creative ideas on how to integrate this. And there's now support and knowledge and best practices to allow them to do this. So this is moving from the fringe to something more feasible. But that number really scares me. So let's talk about urban agriculture and the different types. I think all urban farms are not made equal. And this is a simple spectrum from low-tech to high-tech that can help us understand that a little bit. So on the low-tech side, we have maybe what you're more familiar with. These are community gardens. These are soil-based urban farms. You typically see these. They're volunteer-run. They're mostly contributing to giving free food away. And they do some really important things for the city. Specifically in New York City, they manage rainwater in a really interesting way. In New York City, when we get more than an inch of rainwater, our combined sewer system with the water connect and they go into the river. So that's sewage and rainwater going together into the river, and that is an environmental cost. It's almost destroyed all of our oyster production we used to have here in New York City. And so now the Department of Environmental Protection funds these kinds of farms or helps to support them because soil will help to percolate the water instead of concrete. It'll slow it down. This is a really important impact that agriculture and the soil-based side can have on the city. Moving more towards the high-tech side, we have the example of aerofarms. So who's here heard about aerofarms? Okay, so aerofarms is a large-scale warehouse conversion into a vertical farm. Vertical farms are stacked hydroponic or aeroponic. This is a more precise form of hydroponics. They're basically water culture systems, recirculating systems that are stacked on top of each other. sometimes 5, sometimes 10, sometimes 17 levels high. And so what they do is they control all the variables for growth. You can control temperature, light, ventilation, everything you need to grow the ideal plant indoors without pesticides, and do that very efficiently. And you're also converting a warehouse. So this is a really interesting model for cities as well, where there's maybe industries like various industries in the New England that have kind of suffered. We can replace those buildings now with different farms. And that's what AeroFarms has shown. It also creates a lot of jobs. AeroFarms facility, one number was 70 jobs they're creating. That's going to make a big difference in Newark, New Jersey, where they're based. However, this farm isn't slowing down rainwater. It's not contributing to biodiversity directly. So it has a very different impact, an impact that's more year-round into production, an impact that's more economic and producing jobs. And then as we move to the middle, there's other trade-offs. So Harlem Grown is a great example because it's a hybrid model. They have a hydroponic greenhouse and a soil-based urban farm. So I want you to think about the trade-offs next time you look at an urban farm. What is its social impact? What is its environmental or ecological impact? What about its economic impact? What about the impact on the aesthetic of the city? Is one communicating better than the other? I think as we start to think this way, we'll be able to use the toolbox of different types of urban farms in a more responsible way. And that's really what our practice is about at Agritecture. We call Agritecture the art, science, and practice of integrating agriculture into the built environment. And one of the ways we do that successfully is by being open-minded to the various options available and encouraging our clients to consider their options. Don't just be attracted and allured by vertical farming and not consider what soil can do for you. That's different. So here's a bit of a background on vertical farming. One of the things that, and this is really the more hyped up, excited topic right now, is vertical farming. Greenhouses have been around for longer, soil-based farms for longer. So I'm going to talk a little bit about vertical farming. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, right? King Nebuchadnezzar, the myth goes that his wife was tired of the desert and was missing the more lush green areas that she came from before she moved to Babylon. And so he decided to build her this Hanging Gardens of Babylon, these hydroponic gardens with cascading plants over them in the city. And so I think vertical farming, even today, is still about that. It's about making a statement about human engineering to bring nature into the city. And I think we see that trend continue. So in 1975, you've got the first NFT system. For those of you who don't know, that's a nutrient film technique. This is a method of hydroponics that uses a thin layer of water, oxygen, and nutrients to just pass by the roots of the plants. It's typically used in greenhouses. 1975. In 2010, my mentor, Dr. Dixon DePommier, wrote the book, The Vertical Farm. Again, very fascinating impact that has had. If you look on Google Trends, you can see the uptake in trends and searches for vertical farming since that book was published. And so that shows you the power of ideas. I meet people today who have started commercial vertical farms, multiple people, based upon that book. Even though that book wasn't necessarily about the technical elements of vertical farming, it inspired a whole new generation. And that's the power of ideas when it comes to sharing green architecture and sharing a vision of the future. And we don't want to underestimate this, not in the face of that 58 years old number. We need to inspire the next generation to take action. So in 2011, when I started my blog, that was really about how can we take this vision of the future and juxtapose it with real business, real news, real technical information. My hope was that people who observed the blog and heard the messages I was putting out would feel inspired to get involved. They wouldn't just feel like this is some disconnected, futuristic reality, but that there's something that they can do at a small scale. AeroFarms reached $30 million in investment in 2015, and then now following that, Plenty Ag has already reached $226 million in investment. There were no commercial vertical farms in North America of any significance or scale 3.5, 4 years ago. So for me, it's been incredible to see the growth of this industry. Investors take attention to it, or see it in the One NYC plan that they're going to convert warehouses into vertical farms, or see Atlanta have a director of urban agriculture. This is really accelerating at a very interesting, a very fast pace that is exciting for me. And so that's when Agritecture was born in 2011, to really share these ideas and extend it to be part of that solution. And what we do, as I said, is we're technology agnostic. So what does that mean? It means we don't get paid for representing a light or an equipment. A lot of entrepreneurs in this space, they have difficulty being successful because they have limited choices. They can either go to an independent consultant that knows how to grow. This could be a grower or an engineer. They can go to a large consultancy that has a little bit of a practice in agriculture but doesn't really understand the models on a city-by-city basis. Or they can go to a technology company and get it free consulting, but you have to buy their equipment. And so it's very difficult for a lot of farmers to get started because they don't have that many choices. What I wanted to do was fill in that gap and provide technology agnostic, as unbiased as I can be, to be an objective coach. And what we do is we really advise our clients on the technology choices they have and let them make the decision on which scenario they want to go with. We're interdisciplinary, so we've got sustainability managers, engineers, designers. We've got 3 different growers, some soil, some hydro, some more vertical. And we work together in an iterative process to design these farms, and these are some of the services we offer. So yeah, that's me in our greenhouse in the Bronx. And then we've got our office there in the middle where we teach classes, and that's my colleague Yara, also at the greenhouse. So I wanted to share a methodology with you quite transparently, how we do this, so that you don't necessarily need me. You can try this on your own. But the basics are really asking the right questions at the beginning. And these questions really are, what is your unique proposition? In any business, you need to have a unique offering. And in agriculture, there's so much competition at volume that if you're not entering the market with a new product, when I say new product, it's either packaged in a new way, marketed in a new way, creates a new experience, then you don't really have much competition. You need to know how you define success as well at that stage. We go then into market research. So we do focus groups. We talk to potential customers. We talk to buyers. We look at the competition. We look at the pricing. What are people going to pay for this? And then we start to look at the site. Where are we going to go in that market research stage? So what's available? What's the permitting that might prevent us from scaling up and building this facility? And then once you know what you're going to grow and where you're going to grow it, you can decide how, and you can design your system. You choose your equipment. You can maybe do a couple different designs, choose the one that makes the most sense for your budget, for your purpose, and then you really can get into CapEx and OpEx. And then what we usually end up giving to our clients, because we're in the earlier stage, is an implementation plan, a pitch deck for them to go to investors, and a plan on how to get there. So this can work for you at really any scale, whether it's in your house or elsewhere. But this is a simple methodology for you to design your own urban farm. These are some of the clients we've been able to work with, Square Roots, whom you know, and this was a really exciting project, and I just wanted to highlight some of the different models here and takeaways. So what Square Roots has done really well is they've captured the imagination of these young people and their excitement about this space, as so much to actually bring them on as the farmers themselves. And so each container, there's 10 of them, in the first year had their own grower, and those growers had the opportunity to build their own business, grow their product, test it out to the consumers. As you can see here, this is a vertical farming integration in individual containers. So vertical farming can be stacked systems like this, or it can be vertically inclined. It's really about using 3-dimensional space. It's not, some people try to be more strict with the definition, but I think it's more about 3-dimensionality and integration than it is about one specific height or if it's a skyscraper, for example. Some of the challenges with this model are that now you have individual systems, right? So the economies of scale of that might be difficult. Now you've got an individual AC unit for each one. So the energy consumption, some of the labor, you might lose some efficiency there. Sky Vegetables in the Bronx is exciting because it's a greenhouse that's integrated into an affordable housing building, presenting a new model for agriculture and architecture together. 10% of the product at least has to be sold to the residents in the building. And so we had to learn a lot working with that client on how we're going to deliver that product to the customers and what do they want. Communities in the Bronx are interested in very different food than the communities in Manhattan, for example. So it's really about listening to your customer and working with them. And Farm One is one of the projects we're most excited to have worked with. This is Rob Lang, an Australian entrepreneur who is a home chef and talented designer. This is a basement in Tribeca. This is their second facility. We helped them with their first one. And they wanted to grow rare culinary herbs year-round. Really exciting products, food that excites your mouth and your smell and everything. Really excites all your senses. But it's still a vertical farm in a basement, and it's more interesting because it has this variety, and it also is a manifestation of what you could do with very useless spaces. I mean, this space was empty, it wasn't being used, and now it's a productive farm. They host tours. There's a lot of wonderful things to gain from it. But the most exciting thing for me in this was that we proposed crops for them that had never been grown indoors before, and so there was a level of experimentation that really pushed the boundaries of the variety that's being grown indoors. And I think that's exciting as these farms continue to do that. Typically, vertical farms will mostly just grow microgreens and leafy greens. And so there's going to be, we talk about peak lettuce in our industry. When's the point that there's going to be so much that it's not interesting anymore to the customer? So projects like this that can really create variety and can often have products that you've never tasted before, that can really be a transformative experience in the context of this technology. So what's next for cities? That's what I think about a lot. We talked a lot about kind of the micro operation by operation, right? So what are the trade-offs between making the choice? How do you plan your farm? And then some examples and some case studies. But what's next when we take a step away and we look at cities? Well, here are some of the urban challenges that we're going to be facing in the future, and it's certainly not comprehensive, but these are some of the critical ones and important ones. And I'm going to highlight the ones I'm most interested and focused on. So one is climate resilience. Who was here for Hurricane Sandy? I imagine you all are New Yorkers, okay? So yeah, that was quite a large storm that hit our city, and what a lot of people don't know is that storm almost hit Hunts Point distribution hub, which is the world's largest food distribution hub and provides all the food to the east coast of the United States, all along the seaboard. It's a very critical infrastructure element of our city. And Hurricane Sandy, if it had hit that place, would have caused a lot of damage to our food system. We might not have had that replenishment of food that we saw after we bought it all in the supermarkets, in haste. And so I think what we've done in cities is we've centralized certain infrastructure elements, including those food distribution hubs, and that's created more risk for us. What urban agriculture can do is it can disperse that knowledge on how to grow food, how to distribute food, how to market food to a wider audience of entrepreneurs, which can make our system more resilient. A lot of the indoor farms weren't damaged during that storm. Our greenhouse survived. A lot of the indoor vertical farms weren't damaged, but soil-based urban farms in that storm were hurt. So there's another trade-off as you're considering resiliency. Microgrids, kind of this idea of having battery storage and smaller grids will also have an interesting play for self-reliance at a community neighborhood level. And self-reliance, as I said, is something I'm very interested in. When I first started my blog, I was doing a homework assignment for school, which was looking at why a city like Vancouver doesn't have as many urban farms as it should based on its Greenest City 2020 initiative. And I started finding out that land use was the biggest issue. And so there was really no way for that city to be self-reliant with soil-based urban agriculture on its own. And that kind of led me to look at technological solutions like vertical farming. So food security, a lot of people don't know what's behind it, but there's 5 A's of food security. There's availability, accessibility, adequacy, acceptability, which is more around the cultural appropriateness of food. We can't just say, oh, there's food for everyone. Not everybody eats the same food, and we need to understand that to have a vibrant and successful society, we need to embrace that acceptability. And then agency is really around planning and the capacity to plan for your food system. So my next target is smart cities. I am so tired of these smart cities events and these smart cities dialogues that don't include agriculture. I mean, can a city really be smart without agriculture? Can a city really be smart without food? So what's happening now is we're having this huge influx of smart cities events. We've got Cisco contributing $1 billion to smart cities in their infrastructure, making everything connected through Wi-Fi. Now we've got open data projects, right? So this is exciting, I think, actually. Sharing data about congestion and traffic and distribution. These are all things that can make a really positive impact. But I'm laser focused on right now is how we can get agriculture and urban agriculture onto the agenda for smart cities. New digital cities are emerging. Sidewalk Labs has just recently gotten a deal, $50 million deal, to redesign Toronto's waterfront. that's a really big deal. You know, they're an interdisciplinary team. They have technologists, architects, everything. But in the end, they are pretty much a technology company. This is one of the first times that a technology company is getting the deal to do a planning project. And I think that is a sign of a shift in how we perceive cities and how we think about how they're designed and connected. Neighborhoods. Sasaki is designing a full neighborhood in Shanghai with agriculture as the main cultural connectivity of it. It's the main producer of the jobs. It's the main connector in public spaces. It's the main scientific driver for innovation in the community. The Smart Green Tower in Germany doesn't use agriculture so much, but it's so smart when it comes to energy that it can actually respond to changes in the grid, and it can store energy as needed and even give to a microgrid around it, to other buildings around it. And so now even at the building level, the neighborhood level, the city level, we're seeing the digitization of cities far beyond just our cell phones and what those carriers are tracking, but even sensors in the buildings and in the spaces. And this is becoming part of planning. So now planners are saying, well, how can we make this city smart by adding these sensors to it? I want agriculture to be on that agenda too. If they're talking about those kinds of macro decisions, agriculture should be on that agenda. So what about this number? Any guesses? 87%. What does it represent? I'll give you a clue. It relates to buildings. Okay, that's a good guess. Potential for farms on the roof. This is a cruel game. This is the, according to the EPA, the average percent that Americans spend indoors. So we spend about 6% of our time in cars or in trains, which is also indoors. So 93% of our time is indoors. 87% of our time is in buildings. So I want you to look around you right now. Look around at the space around you, okay? Look at the lights. Look at this beautiful wall, geodesic art, plants. This space is designed to create an experience, to create an energy. And that's the power that buildings have. Buildings, because we spend so much time in them, I believe, have one of the most, they have the most capacity to impact our decisions, our consumer decisions, how we think, the people we connect with, the choices we make when we leave the building. And so I think, for me, I want to bring agriculture into that at a city level and at a building level. And this, to me, is a signal of just how important that could be. So they say citywide Wi-Fi makes a city smart, right? But if you've been following what's been happening in Cape Town, and Cape Town definitely has its own Smart Cities and Future Cities initiative, what good is a smart city without food and water? Cape Town ran out of water. They didn't plan that properly. So you have technology companies going into cities saying, we're going to make your whole city smart. We're going to get people more educated, more connected. I'm not saying that's not important, but I'm saying there's priorities here. I think Maslow's hierarchy of needs communicated it long ago. And I think that if we allow cities to make these decisions for us on what defines a smart city without giving our voice and bringing in food and water to it, then we're gonna lose the cities that really keep us alive. So what are we doing here at Agritecture? I'm going to show something new, a new tool, a new idea. Maybe I'll get your feedback on it. It's called scenario analysis for cities. And so what we are going to be doing now is we're going to be taking the models, the hundreds of models we've developed for urban farmers. Some of them they took, some of them they didn't, and utilizing those for estimating different scenarios for cities. So for example, a city could come to us and say, we want to get 20% local food by 2035. We want 75% of that food to be affordable. We could take our models, look at their various data sets that they have, which I'll talk about in a moment, and then we can estimate how long will it take them to get to that goal, if they're aggressive, if they use greenhouses, if they use soil-based farms, and what the right mix is for that city. And then they can make strategic decisions on how to get there. So this is some of the information we would be looking at. Right? Where is production in the city? Or where is the processing happening? How can we connect the farms to those areas? And then, when we look at the city from an agriculture perspective, we've got urban, we've got peri-urban. Peri-urban usually means on the outskirts of the city. It's basically suburban, but often there's spaces that are not developed around the city. And they still have the access to infrastructure in the city. So this is a really important area for innovation and for things like agriculture, because you still get land that's cheaper, but you still get a lot of the benefits of being local and close to the customer, which is very important. So this is where most of the future of agriculture is going to happen, is on the outskirts of our city. And maybe there'll be smaller representations like Farm One to help us understand and in our buildings maybe to help us make decisions when we're consuming that are more responsible. And so I've been talking about smart agriculture. What do I define as smart agriculture? I think it's the next stage of vertical farming. I kind of alluded to the fact that vertical farming has been quite strict in its definition. I think that's unfortunate, because I think that it's limiting some of the creativity that's needed. So for me, smart agriculture, it's a bit of a buzzword, but vertical farming 2.0, I think it's digital. Whether it's soil-based or not, it needs to have sensors, it needs to understand its impact, and I think that is the future of agriculture across the board, the same way it's the future of cities. I think it's context sensitive, so again, going back to the spectrum, it's about looking at the context. Who is this farm for? Who could be exposed to this? What is the environmental conditions? It's like the way architects look at spaces, but for farming, and I think there's a word for that. And then it's holistic. It's planned and integrated, so this is really taking a step back and considering all the options available and approaching it from an integrated approach, which doesn't happen. Agriculture is traditionally, these days, more monoculture. And so how can we bring some of that diversity in? Well, one way is to try and think about how different systems might integrate. Can you have a soil-based farm growing crops that you can't grow in the indoor farm nearby, thus getting green infrastructure and year-round production? Possibly. So this is how we do the scenario analysis. We take our urban ag models data in. We also add market data on consumption habits, demographic data. We take GIS data, which is mapping data around the city, to see what agricultural uses already exist and what climate might affect there. We look at the climate as well, meaning where it's going to go. So what might be some triggers like storms, or what might be some triggers like sea rise that might prevent us from recommending a farm in a certain location. Building code. We have to look at what the status is now of building code. In most cities, there's not any zoning for agricultural uses. And then we need to kind of consider how we might be able to drive that forward or help it evolve. Been trying to do that in New York, which has been difficult. And then these are other local conditions, costs per square foot, trends, culture, things like that. And then we conduct our scenario analysis. And what that allows us to do is to now say, to get to this goal, like the goal I mentioned, you'll need this many greenhouses, this many vertical farms, this many organic farms, soil farms, aquaculture facilities, mushroom farms. And now we're looking at the city in a different way. We're looking at it from a planning perspective, from a long-term perspective to hit a specific goal, and how agriculture can play a role in that. That's the new approach I want to offer. And so this is an image of a control room for energy. This is a nonprofit that runs energy transmission on the eastern seaboard, mostly the Northeast. And so what they're doing here is they're looking at excess power on the grid, where are we going to transmit it to this area, et cetera. This is happening now. So people are looking at something like energy, which is definitely critical to our livelihoods, in a very data-driven way. As agriculture becomes more digitized, my vision is that we'd be able to do the same thing for agriculture. This is a new smart city that's being planned in Qatar, and this is their vision of their control room and hypothetical data points they're looking at. But these are actual data points right now in Dubai, and what they're tracking for congestion and for traffic, et cetera. So my vision is that in the future, and again, this is a bit more in the future, I'm not talking about the next 2 years, I'm talking maybe 10 years, cities will be able to understand what are the risks with the storm of Sandy, how that might affect our current food supply, how it might affect trucks coming to the city, what are we producing now, maybe information on jobs and how we're catching up with the response to the fact that those 58-year-old farmers now are much older and that they don't have farms anymore. We're producing less diversity. So, you can imagine these might shift to things that might track food safety and food-related illness, imports that are coming in, weather pattern changes that might affect agriculture, crop varieties and diversity for the city. Imagine a city that valued food as much as they value energy, as much as they value Wi-Fi. So data isn't enough. It's not going to do the trick. You also need to fill in the gaps to get there. So basically, after we've kind of answered this goal, right? What are the scenarios A, B, and C to get to this goal? Our job is to fill in the gaps on what you do to get there. One really important part is community building. The NYC Ag Collective is a collective of urban farms here that work together to lobby the city. We share our needs. We help with cross-promoting each other's work. And we host events, like our Fresh in February event on the 20th. near Union Square. And these are great ways to share information. It's very, very difficult being an entrepreneur in the city, but being an urban farmer entrepreneur is even more difficult, I would say, in most cases. So if you're not collaborating, you're really missing something. And there's real ways to collaborate, like shared resources with packaging or vehicles or processing. And imagine building all those things independently. That's very difficult for new farmers. And we need new farmers, as we've already understood. Education. The DIY Plus Farm, if you go to plus.farm, this is a DIY vertical farm that I've designed with my team. It's 100% open source. You can go on there, get the instructions, and build your own if you want. So you don't need to hire me if you want to do it on your own. Workforce development is critical to this as well. These trainings, Cornell is now doing a lot of that. They have 2 extension agents in New York City that are helping educate farmers on the best practices for rural farmers. That's a great win for the city. Sorry? Well, Cornell really works with rural farmers mostly, and so they're taking the knowledge from rural farmers to help teach urban farmers. So urban farmers it's a great question, comment. Urban farmers are very good at working with limited space, they're very good at accessing the customer, they're very good at working with technology because of the limited space, but rural farmers have much more experience with pest outbreaks, much more experience with managing large-scale farms, so as those urban farms get bigger, the rural farms can help them, and those need to be bridged, right? We can't feed the city alone with urban agriculture, unfortunately. But if we look at the whole regional system and we work together, and again, that is part of this analysis and how this data would come in, we can get there. We actually have a hope of getting quite close to that. So this is an event that we're organizing as a symbol of that activation. It's the Atlanta Conference. The City of Atlanta has asked us to help them activate urban agriculture in the city. So what we're doing is we're bringing in smart cities experts in 7 topic areas to talk side by side with smart agriculture experts to then showcase to other future events and to the world that a city cannot be smart without agriculture. And this is how we're kind of trying to transform and redo the message. If you're interested, there's a promo code that's easy to remember if you want to take part, and I can answer any questions about it afterwards. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate the energy, attention, and consideration. Thank you.